Stop. Just for a moment, beloved, stop. Not because something is wrong. Not because you have failed, or fallen behind, or missed the window you were afraid was already closing. Stop because something holy has entered the space around you, and it did not come to add to what you are already carrying. It came because it saw you carrying it. Archangel Michael is here. Not at a distance. Not watching from some unreachable height where your ordinary life looks too small to matter. He is here, in the room where you are sitting right now, in the breath you just took without noticing, in the particular quality of this moment that feels, if you are paying attention, just slightly different from the moments before it. Something shifted. You may not have words for it yet. You may have felt it as a tightening in your chest that released without reason, or a sudden stillness that arrived in the middle of a mind that has not been still in a very long time. That was not random. Nothing about this moment is random. He has been trying to reach you. Not the version of you that smiles and says everything is fine. Not the version that makes the plans and sends the messages and keeps the household from falling apart, and carries the worry about money so quietly that some days even you forget it is there. Pressing, constant, leaning its full weight against the inside of your ribs. He has been reaching for the one underneath all of that. The one who waits until the house is silent before letting the face fall. The one who has prayed the same prayer so many times that the words have started to feel like worn cloth, faithful, fraying, still held close because there is nothing else to hold. He sees that one. He has always seen that one. There is something you need to understand about the season you are in, and it requires that you stay with this message, not because the answer is complicated, but because your heart has been so full of noise for so long that the truth, when it finally arrives, tends to need a little stillness to land. So breathe. Let the shoulders drop. Let the jaw unclench. You are not being asked to perform anything here. You are being asked only to receive. The air around you is different now. If you are sensitive, and those who find this message tend to be, you may have already noticed it. A warmth that did not come from a heater. A sense of being accompanied that your rational mind keeps trying to explain away. A pressure behind the eyes that is not quite tears but is something adjacent to them, something that belongs to the part of you that has been waiting a very long time for someone to simply see what you have been doing and say, I know. I have been watching. You have not been invisible in this. Because you have not. Every morning you rose when rising felt like lifting stone. Every bill you faced with a stomach that knew the numbers before the statement arrived. Every conversation you navigated carefully because you could not afford, emotionally, financially, practically, for one more thing to come undone. Every night you lay down still calculating, still turning it over, still asking the same quiet question into the dark above you. Is there a way through this that I cannot see yet? Heaven heard every single one. If you feel called to support this channel and the sacred work being carried here, the link is waiting in the pinned comment below. Whatever you are able to offer becomes a seed, not a transaction, but a living act of trust, and what you release in faith has a way of returning to you in the exact form your season requires. Now, there is something Archangel Michael needs you to understand about the doors that did not open. You believed, and perhaps some part of you still believes, that the closed doors were evidence of something. Evidence that you were not ready, or not worthy, or simply not the kind of person for whom things come through cleanly and without struggle. You have watched others step through openings that seem to appear effortlessly for them, and you have stood at your own sealed door and wondered, in the quiet language of exhaustion, what the difference is between you and them. You may have even wondered whether the God you speak to in private is listening with the same attention to you as to others whose lives seem to move more freely. But here is what was hidden from you in those moments. Not every closed door was rejection. Some of them were protection wearing an unfamiliar face. Some of what you were reaching for, what seemed so right, so necessary, so perfectly timed, would have brought you through to a place from which recovery would have been long and costly and deeply private. You were being redirected. Not abandoned. Not overlooked. Redirected by a hand that could see further down the road than your hunger could afford to look. Archangel Michael stood at some of those doors himself. And what he is preparing to show you now is not simply why they closed, it is what he was keeping you for instead. But that is where part 2 begins. Because what comes next is not a small thing, dear heart. What comes next requires that you understand first what you are, who you were before the weight of this season convinced you that surviving was the same as living. And Archangel Michael has something very specific to say about the burden you picked up that was never, from the very beginning, meant to be yours alone to carry. Stay close. What arrives next will reach the part of you that has been waiting the longest. There is a quality to this silence that is different from ordinary quiet. You may have noticed it already, not as a sound, but as the absence of a particular kind of pressure. The kind that sits behind your thoughts on a normal day, the low and constant hum of everything unresolved, everything pending, everything that depends on you in ways that never fully clock out. For just a moment, that hum is lower. Not gone, you are not being promised a life without complexity, but lower, as though something has placed a hand over it, gently, the way you might quiet a room not by demanding silence but simply by entering it with enough stillness that everything else adjusts. That is what is happening around you right now. Archangel Michael carries a frequency that does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive with the theatrical rush of wind you might have imagined from the old stories. It arrives the way dawn arrives, not in a single moment you can pinpoint, but as a gradual and undeniable shift in the quality of light. And if you have been sitting with this message since part 1, something in you has already begun to feel it. A settling. A strange and unearned calm. The sense that whatever you walked into this moment carrying has not disappeared, but has somehow become, for just this small window of time, slightly less sharp at the edges. Pay attention to that feeling. It is not distraction. It is not wishful thinking performing itself as peace. It is a real and living thing, and it belongs to this encounter. There are those who will move through this message quickly, who will absorb the words and continue on to the next task the moment it ends. And there is nothing wrong with that. But you, and you will know whether this is you, you are one of those who feels things in layers. Who returns to a song, a sentence, a moment of stillness long after it has passed, because something in you knew there was more inside it than the surface offered. You have always been this way. Sensitive in ways that were not always understood as gifts because they came without instructions, and the world around you was not particularly gentle with what it did not understand. Archangel Michael has not overlooked this about you. In fact, it is precisely this, the depth at which you feel, the weight you assign to things others release easily, the way a single conversation can stay inside you for days, still unfolding, that made this message necessary. Not as correction, as confirmation. If something in this is reaching a part of you that does not often get reached, leave a word in the comments, even a single one. Let this space become a place where what you carry does not have to be carried alone. The atmosphere around you is still shifting. There are moments in a life, not many, but a few, when time behaves differently. When an afternoon holds more weight than a year. When a single night of honest reckoning does more interior work than a decade of surface-level coping. When something arrives, a piece of music, an unexpected silence, a message in a still small voice, and rearranges something in the deep interior that you did not even know had been sitting crooked. This is one of those moments. Not because the words are extraordinary, but because the timing is not accidental, and somewhere beneath your rational mind, you already knew that before this sentence arrived. Think about the weeks leading here. Think about what has been accumulating, not just the practical weight, the finances, the relationships straining at their seams, the questions that have not received their answers, but the interior weather. The fog that settled somewhere around your sense of direction. The growing difficulty of imagining what relief would even feel like. Because you have been in the pressure long enough that pressure has started to feel like the natural climate of your life. Heaven noticed the exact hour that fog descended. And what is moving through this atmosphere right now is not a temporary comfort that will dissolve the moment the video ends. It is something that will continue working in you, in the quiet after, in the dream that arrives later, in the thought that surfaces tomorrow morning when you are not expecting it. Because that is how Archangel Michael moves. Not in isolated events. In continuous and patient unfolding. There is a memory beginning to surface now, not necessarily a dramatic one. Perhaps something small. A moment you had almost forgotten, from a season that felt equally uncertain, equally heavy, equally without clear exit. And what you will find, if you let it rise fully, is that you made it through that season too. Not because the circumstances resolved themselves neatly, but because something in you, something that was being held even when you did not feel held, kept the thread intact. That same something is holding the thread right now. And what Archangel Michael is about to place before you in the next part of this message is not a reassurance. It is a recognition, one so precise, so specific to the interior shape of your life, that when it arrives you may need to sit with it quietly before you can move. Because he is not here to speak to the version of you that has learned to manage. He is here to speak to the one who still remembers what it felt like before managing became the whole of the story. He knows what you have not said out loud. Not the surface version of it, not the edited summary you offer when someone asks how you are doing and you answer in a way that is technically honest but carefully incomplete. He knows the version that lives below that. The one you turn over in the private hours. The one that keeps its own counsel because you have learned, through specific and sometimes painful experience, that not everyone who asks how you are is equipped to hold what you actually are. So you carry it well. You carry it quietly. You have become, over time, remarkably skilled at carrying things in a way that does not alarm the people around you, and there is a kind of love in that, a real and genuine love for the ones you are trying to protect from the full weight of what you hold. But Archangel Michael needs you to hear this clearly, with nothing softened. The weight of what you carry has not gone unnoticed simply because you carry it gracefully. He has seen every version of it. He has seen the financial fear that wakes you before the alarm, not dramatically, not with a racing heart, but with a quiet and immediate return to the numbers, to the calculations, to the gap between what is needed and what is present. He has seen the way you have learned to live inside that gap as though it were simply the geography of your life. As though anxiety about provision were just another feature of the landscape you navigate rather than a weight that was never supposed to rest permanently on your particular shoulders. He has seen the way you pray about it, and then find yourself worrying about it within the same hour, not because your faith is weak, but because the need is real and it is daily and it does not pause to let you catch your breath. He has seen the relationships you tend carefully even when they cost you more than they return. The ones in which you are reliably the one who holds steady when the other person shakes. The ones where your role has quietly calcified into something that leaves very little room for your own unraveling. Because someone has to be the one who does not unravel, and it became you so gradually that you cannot precisely remember when the assignment was given or whether you ever formally agreed to it. Stay here with this message a little longer. What is being spoken into your life right now is not finished arriving. He has seen the loneliness that lives inside a busy life. The particular ache of being needed constantly, and known rarely. The difference between being surrounded and being seen, a difference you understand with your whole body, even if you have never put that exact shape of language around it. There are people in your life who love you. That is true. And it is also true that love and understanding are not always the same thing, and that there is a form of loneliness that persists even inside genuine relationship, because the part of you that holds the deepest fears, the most persistent questions, the most honest grief, that part has not found a consistent place to be received without management. You have grieved things you were not given permission to grieve. Perhaps an old version of your life that was supposed to go differently. A relationship that ended without resolution, leaving something in you still mid-sentence. A dream that was not taken from you violently but simply accumulated dust until you stopped being sure whether you had set it down or lost it. A season of provision and ease that felt briefly like solid ground and then shifted, and left you wondering whether stable ground was something you were allowed to want, or whether the wanting itself was a kind of presumption. Archangel Michael is speaking directly into that grief now. Not to minimize it. Not to reframe it into something prettier than it was. But to stand at the edge of it with you and say, this was real. What you lost was real. What you hoped for was not foolish. And the fact that it has not yet arrived, or arrived and then withdrew, does not mean that what you were hoping for was never yours to hope for. He knows the weight of hoping in a season that keeps offering new reasons to stop. He knows what it has cost you to keep the heart open when every practical instinct said to close it, protect it, stop expecting. He has watched you negotiate privately with your own faith, trying to hold trust and honesty in the same hands, trying to remain believing without becoming the kind of person who cannot acknowledge that something genuinely hard is happening. That negotiation has not been invisible. And what you are about to receive in the next part of this message is something you have felt circling you for a long time. A confirmation of things your spirit already sensed but your mind was afraid to fully receive, because receiving them would require you to trust what you have already been through enough times to be afraid of trusting again. But something is different now. And the difference is not in your circumstances. The difference is in what is standing beside you while you read this. You have felt things you could not explain. Not in a way that alarmed you, or not always, but in a quiet, persistent way that has followed you through ordinary days and left you wondering whether what you were sensing was real or whether you were simply someone who had been under enough strain for long enough that the mind had begun generating its own signals. You have had moments of inexplicable peace arrive in the middle of situations that logically warranted none. You have woken from sleep with a certainty about something that you could not have arrived at through analysis. You have walked into a room, or opened a message, or heard a particular song, and felt something shift in the inner atmosphere, a recognition that had no obvious origin, a feeling of being nudged toward or away from something by a hand you could not see. And then, almost immediately, you talked yourself out of it. Because that is what you have been trained to do, not by cruelty, but by a world that distributes its credibility very selectively, and tends to reserve it for what can be measured, verified, repeated in controlled conditions. So the quiet inner voice that said not this one about an opportunity that later confirmed itself as wrong, you dismissed it as irrational hesitation. The sense of being watched over during a season when the watching felt most needed, you reframed it as wishful thinking born from stress. The strange, sourceless comfort that arrived on the night you were most afraid about money, most afraid about the future, most afraid that the gap between need and provision would not close in time. You accepted the comfort gratefully in the moment, and then quietly suspected yourself for having felt it, because faith that arrives in feeling has been made to seem less reliable than faith that arrives in doctrine. Archangel Michael is standing here as witness to every one of those dismissed moments. Every whisper you chose not to trust. Every knowing you overrode with logic. Every time your body said something is here and your mind said that is not a language that counts. He is asking you now, gently and with complete authority, to reconsider. Because the signs were real. Not all of them. Discernment is its own sacred practice, and not every impression carries equal weight. But the ones you felt most deeply, the ones that arrived not as excitement but as settled knowing, the ones that did not make noise but simply were, those were real. And the fact that you did not fully receive them did not cancel them. They have been held in trust, patient and intact, waiting for a moment precisely like this one, when you might be ready to stop apologizing for the way you perceive the sacred. If this is touching something real inside you, something you have carried privately for a long time, write it in the comments. Not for anyone else. For yourself. Because naming what has been silent is its own form of beginning. There is something specific Archangel Michael wants to validate in this moment, and it is this: the delays were not evidence that you were forgotten. You have interpreted the silence of unanswered seasons as a kind of verdict. And it is understandable. When you are inside a long waiting, when the prayer is sincere and the need is genuine, and the answer does not come in any form you can recognize, the mind will inevitably begin to construct explanations. And the explanations it constructs in seasons of exhaustion are rarely generous. They tend toward, perhaps I am not the kind of person whose prayers move things. Perhaps I asked for too much. Perhaps the faith I thought I had was thinner than it needed to be, and the silence is the sound of that deficiency being made plain. None of that was true. The silence was not a verdict. It was a veil, and there is a profound difference between the two. A verdict is final. A veil is temporary, and it is hiding something, and what it hides is not punishment or absence but a preparation that required more time than your circumstances made comfortable. You have also felt, at various points in this season, a pull. A gravitational sensation towards something you could not name, Not a specific outcome, not a clear destination, but a direction. A sense that despite everything unresolved, despite the financial pressure and the relational strain and the exhaustion of being the one who holds the pieces, despite all of it, something in you knew that this was not the end of the story. That the chapter you were in was genuinely difficult but was nonetheless a chapter, with pages still ahead that the current scene had not yet earned the right to show you. That pull was not self-delusion. That pull was Archangel Michael keeping a hand on the thread of your life, even during the seasons when you could neither see nor feel the hand. The pull you felt toward continuing, toward one more day, one more attempt, one more quiet act of faithfulness in a season that was not rewarding faithfulness visibly, that was not merely resilience. That was participation. You were being held in motion by something that does not abandon what it has called. And what he has called you to, what you are beginning, even now, to sense more clearly, is something that the weight of this season was never meant to cancel, only to prepare. Because what is being revealed next is not simply comfort. It is a layer of this story that you have not yet been able to see from the inside. A truth about what has actually been happening in the places you could not watch. In the rooms where decisions were being made on your behalf without your knowledge. In the spaces between your prayers and their answers, where something was moving that required your waiting not as punishment but as part of the architecture of what was being built. That truth is very close now. And when it arrives, it will not feel like new information. It will feel like recognition, like the name of something you already knew but had not yet been given the language to speak. There are things that were kept from you that were never meant to wound you. Not secrets held with malice. Not truths withheld by carelessness or design. But a category of knowing that exists at the edge of human perception, things that could not be shown to you while you were still inside the season that required them to stay hidden, because the human heart is not always able to hold the full meaning of something while it is still living inside the pain of it. You cannot always see the purpose of a wound while the wound is still open. You cannot always read the map while you are still crossing the terrain it describes. But you are at a threshold now. Not past it yet. Do not misread this as an announcement that all difficulty has concluded. You are at the edge of a particular kind of seeing that only becomes available after a certain amount of living through. And Archangel Michael is standing at this threshold with you, not to push you across it before you are ready, but to illuminate what has been waiting on the other side of your understanding. Here is the first thing that was hidden. The door that did not open, the one you returned to more times than you would easily admit, the one you prayed over and prepared for and believed you were ready for, was not locked against you because you were insufficient. It was locked because what was behind it was not sufficient for you. And there is a difference so profound between those two statements that it can rearrange the entire emotional architecture of how you have been reading your own story. You were not rejected by what was behind that door. You were protected from it. And the protection did not feel like protection because you could not see what you were being protected from. Only the door, and the key that did not turn, and the silence where an answer should have been. There is something Archangel Michael must say carefully here, and he asks that you receive it with the same care. Some of what you were reaching toward during your most desperate seasons would have cost you something you have not yet been able to name. Not money. Not opportunity. Something quieter and more essential, a piece of yourself that, once given to the wrong door, would have taken years to recover. The rushed decision made from fear rather than clarity. The agreement entered under pressure that would have bound you to a burden heavier than the one you were trying to escape. The relationship leaned into too deeply at a moment of vulnerability that would have confirmed every wrong thing you had been starting to believe about your own worth. Heaven saw those doors before you reached them. If you are feeling this in your body as you receive it, if there is a release happening somewhere in your chest that you did not consciously initiate, remain here. Let it complete. This is not just a message for the mind. Archangel Michael is working in the layer beneath words right now, and what is being loosened has been held tightly for a very long time. There is a second hidden thing. And this one may be harder to receive, not because it is painful but because it requires you to extend toward yourself a generosity you have long reserved for others. The season of financial pressure you have been living inside, the one that wakes before you do, the one that attends every conversation about the future with its quiet, insistent presence, was not a sign that you are being withheld from. It was, in its particular and difficult way, a crucible. Not in the sense that suffering is noble and therefore you should be grateful for it. That would be a cruelty dressed in spiritual language, and Archangel Michael does not traffic in cruelties. But a crucible in the sense that something in you has been clarified by this pressure that could not have been clarified any other way. A discernment has been developing in you, about what you truly need, about who is genuinely present, about what you are actually building and why, that seasons of ease do not produce with the same precision. You know things now that you did not know before the pressure came. You know the difference between a foundation and an appearance of one. You know which relationships hold and which ones reveal their limits when holding becomes costly. You know the interior difference between choosing something from abundance and choosing it from fear, and you know which of those choices tends to unravel in ways that compound rather than resolve. These are not small things. These are the instruments of a life navigated with wisdom rather than merely with hope, and they were forged in you during the very season you have been most desperate to exit. The hidden layer is this: you were being equipped, not emptied. What looked from the inside like a slow and grinding diminishment was, from the perspective that Archangel Michael carries, a sharpening. And what you are being sharpened for is not yet fully visible, but it is real, and it is closer than the distance your current exhaustion makes it appear, and it requires exactly the kind of person you have been becoming in the dark. There is more to this hidden layer. There is a specific thing that has been moving on your behalf in a place you could not see or monitor or pray over with any precision, because you did not know it existed. And Archangel Michael will speak to it, but first he must bring into the light something that has been sitting in the shadow of this message since it began. Something that has a face, and a name in your memory, and a particular weight that belongs not just to circumstance but to relationship. Because the burden you carry was never yours alone to have assembled. And the question of how it came to rest so fully on your particular shoulders is one that heaven is prepared to answer. There is someone in your life, or someone who is in your life, whose struggle has become so woven into your own that you have stopped being able to feel where their weight ends and yours begins. You did not plan for it to happen this way. It was not a single decision you made on a particular afternoon. It was a slow accumulation, the natural movement of love towards someone in need, repeated often enough and over a long enough period that the movement eventually became posture, and the posture eventually became identity. You became the one who holds. The one who does not add to the problem. The one whose own turbulence gets managed internally, privately, in the margins of a life already filled with the management of someone else's. Archangel Michael sees the specific face that just came to your mind. He is not here to render a verdict on that person. He is not here to name them as a villain in your story or to suggest that the love you extended was foolish or misplaced. Love is rarely foolish at its root, even when it is costly. Even when it gives in ways that are not equally received. Even when it sustains at personal expense for longer than was ever sustainable. The love itself was real, and it was good, and it came from a genuine place in you that has not been corrupted by the difficulty of what followed. But the weight is something that needs to be looked at honestly. Not to assign blame, not yet, and perhaps not ever, because some of what you carry was not placed on you by a single person's intention but by a series of circumstances nobody fully controlled. Still, Archangel Michael is asking you to look without the usual softening. To look at what it has actually cost you to be this person's steadiness. To look at what you have not been able to pursue, not been able to rest into, not been able to grieve properly, not been able to afford, emotionally, practically, financially. Because your resources, in every sense of that word, have been distributed in ways that consistently left your own portion thinner than it needed to be. If you have never said this out loud before, you are allowed to say it here. This has cost you more than you have shown anyone. There are versions of this story that were the face of a parent who needed more care than they could ask for cleanly, and you became the one who provided it because the others were not available, or not willing or not close enough to feel the weight the way you did. There are versions that were the face of a partner whose instability became a weather system you learned to navigate rather than a shared condition you addressed together. There are versions that wear the face of a child, and that particular weight is one that requires no explanation, because love for a child does not permit the simple act of setting it down, and yet it can grow so large in seasons of fear about their well-being that it occupies the whole of your interior life and leaves no room for your own. There are versions that wear the face of a friendship that has been quietly one-directional for so long that the imbalance has become invisible through familiarity. There are versions that wear the face of a sibling, a colleague, an aging relative, a community, a calling, someone or something that you love and have served faithfully and at genuine cost, without the serving ever being fully seen or named for what it was. Archangel Michael is naming it now. Stay with this. Don't let the mind rush toward resolution before the recognition is complete. If this is opening something real, something you have been circling for a long time without landing on, leave a word below. You don't need to explain the whole story. One word is enough. Let this be the place where it gets to exist outside of you, even briefly. There is something specific you must say about this person and this weight, and it requires a particular kind of careful love to receive. Because the truth of it is layered, there is a layer of sorrow in it, and a layer of relief, and a layer of something that might initially feel like guilt before it resolves itself, with enough time and gentleness, into something closer to freedom. The burden was not entirely theirs to give and entirely yours to receive. But neither was it meaningless. The love that moved you toward carrying it was not wasted, and Archangel Michael will be very precise about this, because he has watched you wonder. He has watched you sit in the quiet and ask whether it was worth it, whether the giving meant anything, whether the person at the center of all this weight even knows, or would care if they knew, how much of you went into holding things steady for them. He wants you to know that the question is understandable. And he wants you to know that the answer is not what your exhaustion has been telling you. But there is something even beneath that, something about the origin of why you became the carrier, why this pattern found you specifically, why your particular set of gifts and wounds made you the one most likely to absorb rather than deflect. And that something is not a wound to reopen. It is a door to understand. Because inside the understanding of why you carry the way you carry is the precise location of the freedom Archangel Michael is trying to bring you into. And what he is about to instruct you, in the next part of this message, is not a spiritual exercise to perform. It is a single act of interior honesty that most people spend a lifetime avoiding, not because they are cowardly, but because no one ever told them it was allowed. You were allowed to need something too. You were allowed to have limits. You were allowed to say this is more than I can hold alone without that admission canceling the love that made you reach for it in the first place. And the instruction Archangel Michael carries is not about abandoning anyone. It is about returning to yourself, and what that return might make possible, not only for you, but for the very person whose weight has been resting on you in ways that were never, from the beginning, the full design. He is not asking you to stop loving. That needs to be said first, plainly, before anything else arrives, because the mind, when it hears the word release in a spiritual context, tends to reach immediately for the most frightening interpretation. It hears release and thinks abandonment. It hears set it down and thinks betrayal. It hears this is not yours to carry alone and begins immediately to calculate the consequences of actually living as though that were true. Who would suffer? What would fall? What version of yourself would remain if you removed the carrying from the center of your identity? Archangel Michael knows this negotiation happens inside you. He is not surprised by it, and he is not asking you to bypass it. He is asking you to stay in this moment long enough for the instruction to reach past the negotiation and land in the place that already knows it is true. The sacred instruction for this season is not a ritual. It is not a prayer with specific words in a specific order spoken at a specific hour. It is something quieter than that, and more difficult, and more transformative than most rituals ever manage to be. It is this: stop carrying the weight as proof of your love. Because somewhere in the long accumulation of this burden, the carrying became confused with the loving. They fused into one gesture, one posture, one continuous act that you no longer fully distinguish. So that on some interior level, setting anything down feels not like relief but like a withdrawal of affection. As though the weight itself were the evidence that you care, and reducing the weight would reduce the caring, and reducing the caring would make you someone you do not want to be. But love and exhaustion are not the same testimony. And Archangel Michael needs you to hear this with all the gentleness and all the authority he carries. You can love someone completely and still require that the weight be redistributed. These are not contradictions. They never were. Take a single breath here before continuing. A real one. Let the chest fully expand. What he is instructing you toward is not a single dramatic act of release, not a confrontation, not an ending, not a declaration. It is a series of small interior permissions, extended toward yourself with the same mercy you would extend without hesitation toward anyone else in your situation. Permission to acknowledge that you are tired without immediately qualifying the tiredness with a list of all the reasons you should not be. Permission to name what this season has cost without framing the cost as ingratitude. Permission to let a need of your own be real, and present, and worthy of being spoken, even if only to the silence of this moment, even if only to Archangel Michael, even if no human witness is available to receive it yet. And there is one more layer to this instruction, perhaps the most important one. There is something you have been chasing that Archangel Michael is asking you to stop, not permanently, but for this season. And it is not a dream. It is not a relationship. It is a proof. You have been chasing the proof that you are enough, not in a conscious, explicit way, but in the quiet architecture of your decisions. The way you say yes past the point of capacity. The way you push through when the body asks to stop. The way you measure your value in a season of lack by what you are still managing to produce or provide or hold together. Because if you are still producing, still holding, still managing, then the lack has not won, and you are still enough, and the fear that you might not be gets briefly quieted. Archangel Michael is asking you to release the proof project. Not the doing. Doing is not the problem, but the doing as proof. The exhausting, invisible, never finished labor of demonstrating your worth through the volume of what you carry. Because worth does not require demonstration. And the one speaking this message into your life right now has never once evaluated you by the weight you were able to sustain. He has evaluated nothing. He has simply watched. And what he has watched is not an output or a performance or a record of endurance. He has watched a soul, your soul, navigating genuinely hard terrain with more faithfulness than you have given yourself credit for, in a season that asked more than it should have, for longer than was fair. You were enough before the carrying. You are enough inside the carrying. You will be enough when the carrying is finally redistributed into hands that were always meant to share it. And what Archangel Michael needs you to surrender, truly surrender, in the interior place where surrender actually happens rather than the place where we narrate it, is the belief that your value is contingent on your capacity. That your belovedness is something you must continually re-earn by continuing to hold what hurts. You were loved before you were useful. You were seen before you were strong. And what is about to be revealed in the next part of this message is why this instruction is arriving now, in this specific season, rather than at any earlier point in the journey. Because the timing of this moment is not incidental. Something has shifted, or is in the final stages of shifting, and Archangel Michael needs you to enter what is coming with open hands rather than hands already full of what you were never meant to carry indefinitely. The season is turning. And what turns with it is something you stop letting yourself imagine, not because the imagining was wrong, but because hope, after a certain amount of disappointment, begins to feel like a vulnerability you cannot afford. But you can afford it now, and you will understand why and what comes next. This message did not find you early. It did not arrive in the season when everything still felt possible, when the prayers were fresh and the hope had not yet accumulated the particular weight that hope develops after it has been carried through enough disappointment. It did not come when you were new to the waiting, when the gap between where you were and where you needed to be still felt like a distance that effort alone might close. It is arriving now, in this specific configuration of your life, with this specific combination of exhaustion and quiet endurance and barely spoken need, because now is precisely when it was designed to arrive. Not as punishment for how long it took, not as reward for having finally suffered enough, but because there is a kind of readiness that cannot be manufactured, cannot be accelerated, cannot be arrived at by wanting it badly enough or praying for it with enough sincerity. It is a readiness that develops the way bone develops, slowly, under pressure, in the invisible interior of things, becoming more dense and more capable of bearing weight precisely because of the weight it has already been asked to bear. And what Archangel Michael is telling you now, with full knowledge of everything you have walked through to arrive at this moment, is that you have reached it. Not the end of difficulty. Let that be clear, because a message that promises the end of all difficulty is a message selling something other than truth. But a threshold. A genuine one. The kind that does not announce itself with fanfare, because the most significant thresholds rarely do. They tend to look, from the outside, like an ordinary Tuesday, like a quiet evening, like a person sitting alone watching a video and not yet knowing that something in them is in the final moments of a long and necessary preparation. You are at that threshold now. And what makes this moment different from the other moments in the season when something seemed about to shift and then did not, or shifted so incrementally that you could not feel it, is not a change in your external circumstances. Not yet. What is different is what has been completed in the interior work. The particular lesson that this season was charged with teaching, not a spiritual lesson in the abstract, but a very specific piece of knowledge about yourself, about what you are willing to carry, and what you are no longer willing to pretend does not cost you, has reached the point of genuine integration. You know something now that you did not know when this season began. Not intellectually. In your body. In the way you make decisions in the quiet moments. In the thing you are no longer able to unsee about the patterns of your own life. And that knowing, that embodied, earned, undeniable knowing, is the condition that certain doors require before they are permitted to open. Remain here a little longer. What Archangel Michael is placing before you is still arriving in full. There are things already in motion that you have not been able to see because they are moving in a register beneath ordinary perception. Conversations that have already happened in places you were not present for. Decisions that have already been made in atmospheres you could not access. Arrangements that are in their final stages of completion and that will, when they become visible, feel less like sudden arrival and more like recognition, like something finally showing its face after a long time of knowing it was near without being able to identify it precisely. This is not the language of magical thinking. Archangel Michael does not trade in fantasy. He is speaking about the very practical reality of a life in which the unseen dimension is as active and as consequential as the seen one, in which what happens in prayer, in surrender, in the long and unglamorous faithfulness of an ordinary person continuing to move through a hard season, has corresponding effects in the material and relational architecture of that person's life. Effects that take time to surface. Effects that require the interior preparation to be sufficiently complete before the exterior can responsibly reflect them. The provision you have needed, and it is real, it is not a small thing, and Archangel Michael does not diminish it by spiritualizing it into abstraction. The provision has not been withheld because you were insufficient or because heaven was indifferent to the specific and daily reality of what lack feels like in a human life. It has been in a process that involved the removal of certain wrong doors from your path, the preparation of certain right ones, the timing of certain convergences that required multiple variables to reach their proper configurations simultaneously. You were not the only element in this process. And some of what you have been waiting for could not arrive until other people, other circumstances, other arrangements completed their own necessary movements. You were waiting in good company, even when the waiting felt entirely solitary. And what is shifting now, what Archangel Michael can name with clarity in this moment, is the approach of a particular kind of clarity that has been building at the edge of your awareness. A sense of direction beginning to solidify where there was fog. A feeling of something lifting that you have been pressing against for so long you had stopped noticing the resistance, and simply accepted it as the texture of forward motion. That lifting is real. It is not wishful thinking manifesting as sensation. It is the perceptible edge of a turn that has already been initiated in the unseen, arriving now at the threshold of your ordinary experience. The season that required this much of you is completing something. Not dramatically. Not with the sudden reversal of every difficulty in a single moment, but with the quiet, irrevocable turning that comes when the hinge has finally moved, when the door that was sealed against you for reasons you now partially understand begins, with a sound so subtle you might almost miss it, to open from the other side. And what you will be asked to walk through is not a corridor back to who you were before the weight came. You cannot return to that. The person who entered this season and the person who is standing at its edge are not the same person, and there is a grief in that, a real one, worth acknowledging, but there is also something else. Something that Archangel Michael wants you to feel before the next part of this message arrives. Something in the space between what you have survived and what you are about to step into. A rightness. A sense, however fragile at first, however easily doubted, that what is coming is something your soul already knows the shape of. That the life beginning to assemble itself on the other side of this threshold is not foreign or unfamiliar but is instead something you have been moving toward for longer than this single season suggested. That the waiting was not random. That the preparation was not punishment. That you were always going to arrive here. And that what arrives with you is not the diminished version that the hardest moments of this season tried to convince you was all that remained, but something tempered, discerning, and deeply, genuinely ready. Something in you is waking up. Not loudly. Not with the rush of sudden emotion or the overwhelming tide that spiritual awakening is sometimes depicted as in the accounts people give when they describe it from the outside. It is quieter than that, and more personal, and more yours. It is the particular feeling of a thing returning to its proper position after a long time of being slightly misaligned, not broken, never broken, but pressed into a shape by circumstance and pressure and sustained difficulty that was not quite the truest shape of it. And now, in this moment, in this specific encounter, something is returning to true. You may feel it as a warmth that does not have an obvious physical source. You may feel it as a loosening around the area of your heart, not a sentimental opening, but a structural one, a release of something that had been bracing there for so long that you stopped noticing it as tension and simply absorbed it as the baseline of how existing in your body felt. You may feel it as a sudden, inexplicable certainty, not about a specific outcome, but about a direction. A sense that there is a way through, even without being able to see the full length of it yet. That the path continues even past the point where the light currently reaches. Let that certainty stay. Do not argue it away. Archangel Michael is activating something in you that belongs to a layer deeper than mood, deeper than motivation, deeper than the ordinary cycle of feeling hopeful and then discouraged, and then hopeful again. What is being activated is something closer to essence, the part of you that knew, before the weight of this season convinced you otherwise, that you were not assembled for merely surviving. That the life you were placed here to inhabit was never meant to consist entirely of maintenance and management, and the quiet heroism of keeping things from falling apart. You were called to something. Not in the grandiose language of destiny as a performance, not the version of calling that requires an audience, or produces a platform, or arrives with external confirmation before it becomes real. But in the intimate, foundational sense of the word, you were made with a specific attentiveness to certain things. A particular way of seeing, of feeling, of noticing what others moved past without pausing. A capacity for depth that has sometimes felt like a burden but was always, in its truest nature, a gift. One that was designed not to isolate you but to equip you for a kind of presence in the world that not everyone is structured to offer. The weight of this season tried to convince you that you had misread that calling. That the evidence of difficulty was evidence of error. That a person genuinely chosen for something would not have been made to wait this long, struggle this hard, carry this much. But that logic only holds if you accept that the path to calling is always smooth, and the evidence of genuine purpose is always comfort. It is not. And you already know this. You have always known this. If what is stirring in you right now feels like something you want to hold on to, share this message with someone who might need to feel it too. Not as an obligation, only if it moves through you with that impulse. What Archangel Michael is restoring in you in this moment is not a feeling. Feelings come and go, and he is not interested in engineering a temporary elevation that evaporates by morning. What is being restored is a knowing. Specifically, the knowing that you are not at the mercy of the season. That you have never been merely a passive recipient of circumstances. Those circumstances have been genuinely hard, and that hardness was real and is not being minimized. But that there is an agency available to you that is deeper than willpower, older than determination, and immune to the kind of exhaustion that erodes ordinary human endurance. It is the agency of a soul that is held. And being held does not mean being carried passively to a predetermined destination without participation. It means moving through your own life with the knowledge, felt, not merely believed, that the ground beneath you is not going to give way. That even in the moments of greatest uncertainty, there is a foundation that your circumstances cannot touch. That the provision you have needed, the clarity you have prayed for, the restoration of what was taken or worn away during the hardest of these days, none of it is beyond the reach of what stands beside you. Archangel Michael is restoring your capacity to receive. Because one of the most quietly devastating effects of a long hard season is that it trains the nervous system for lack. It trains the heart to brace rather than open. It teaches the inner life to manage expectations downward as a form of self-protection, to want less, expect less, risk less of the interior self on the possibility of good things. Because the gap between hoping and not receiving has become familiar enough that it seems safer to remain in the gap than to lean again toward the opening and risk another closing. That protection made sense. It was a rational response to a real pattern of experience. Archangel Michael does not condemn it. But he is gently, firmly, with his hand steady on the place in you that most needs steadiness, he is asking it to stand down. Not because naivety is being recommended. Not because you are being asked to perform a cheerfulness that would be dishonest given everything this season has asked. But because what is approaching requires an open hand to receive it. And the fist that has been clenched for protection, the beautiful, understandable, earned fist of a person who has been trying to hold their life together through sustained difficulty, cannot hold an open hand and a closed one simultaneously. Let it open. Even if only by a degree. Even if the opening feels fragile and provisional and subject to revision. Even if some part of you watches the opening with its arms crossed, waiting to see whether this time it means something. Archangel Michael can work with that. He has worked with far less. He is not requiring perfection of surrender. He is only asking for the beginning of it, the smallest honest willingness to let something in that you have been too braced to receive. Because what is coming toward you, and it is coming, and it has been coming for longer than this single message suggests, requires the version of you that is capable of receiving it. Not the version forged by bitterness. Not the version hollowed by disappointment. The version that is standing here right now, tired, yes, and marked by everything this season has required, but present. Still present. Still, against considerable odds, engaged with the possibility that something true and good and real might still be possible. That version is enough. That version is, in fact, precisely the one required. And Archangel Michael has one final thing to say to that version of you. Something he has been holding for the full length of this message, waiting until this exact moment, when enough has been spoken and enough has been received and the interior ground is soft enough to hold it without it sliding away. It comes in the next breath. In the final words. In the seal that closes this message and opens something in you that will not be reclosed. You were never invisible here. Not in the middle of the night when the calculations would not stop. Not in the morning when you rose before you were ready because the day required it. Not in the silent moments between obligations when the real weight of your life pressed closest, and you held it without letting it show, because showing it felt like a luxury the season did not permit. Not in the prayers that left your mouth feeling hollow because they had been spoken so many times in the absence of visible answer that the words had begun to feel like letters sent to an address you were no longer certain was occupied. Every single one of those moments was witnessed. Not from a distance, not from the kind of height that makes a human life look small and its sufferings look manageable from above, but from close. From the particular closeness of a presence that does not flinch from the unglamorous texture of genuine human difficulty. The bills laid out on a table at night. The conversation held together through sheer will when everything underneath was fracturing. The grief that did not have a clean occasion, so it had no clean permission to exist, so it lived in the body instead and expressed itself as fatigue, as tension, as the low and persistent ache of something unacknowledged pressing for acknowledgement. Archangel Michael was present in every single one of those rooms. Not to intervene in ways that would remove your agency, or to prevent every difficulty that carried within it something necessary, or to rearrange your circumstances into comfort before the circumstances had finished their work in you. But present, attending, holding the thread of your life with a faithfulness that did not waver when your own faltered, that did not diminish when your faith ran thin, that did not interpret your exhaustion as abandonment of what you had been called to and begin to withdraw in response. The thread held. It has always held. And what Archangel Michael is sealing into this moment, into this specific intersection of your life and this message, is not a promise about what your external circumstances will look like in 30 days. It is something older and more durable than that. It is the truth about what you are and what you carry and what is being carried alongside you, pressed into the interior of this moment with the full weight of his authority, so that when the voices return, the ones that speak in the register of fear, of scarcity, of not enough and too late and too far gone, you will have somewhere to return to. A moment that happened. A meeting that was real. A word that was spoken into the specific shape of your life by something that knows that shape completely, and has never once found it insufficient. You are not lost. You are not behind. You are not the sum of what this season has taken from you. You are not the gap between what you needed and what arrived. You are not the version of yourself that exhaustion has been narrating in the quiet hours, diminished, delayed, overlooked, somehow less than what was promised when the story began. You are a soul in active passage, moving through terrain that was always going to be part of your particular journey, not because difficulty was decreed for you specifically, not because some divine ledger required you to earn your way through suffering to something better, but because the life you are being shaped toward required a depth of character, a quality of compassion, a precision of discernment that does not develop in any other school. And you have been in that school. Present, enrolled, sitting in its hardest classes, taking its most demanding examinations, and passing, not by the metrics of ease or speed or visible success, but by the only metric that has ever mattered here, which is that you did not become someone else. You remained yourself. Through the financial pressure that asked you to become someone transactional and desperate. Through the relational weight that asked you to become someone resentful and closed. Through the long silence of unanswered prayers that asked you to become someone cynical, someone who sealed the interior self away from further risk. Through all of it, in ways you have not fully credited yourself for, you remained the person you were before the weight came, more worn, yes. More careful, perhaps. More acquainted with the cost of things. But recognizably, essentially, still you. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. Archangel Michael closes this message not with a prediction but with a covenant. The kind that does not depend on your performance for its validity, that does not require you to feel it fully in order for it to be true, that does not dissolve in the morning when ordinary difficulty resumes and the warmth of this moment becomes something you are trying to remember rather than something you are currently inside. The covenant is simply this. You were seen. You are seen. You will continue to be seen, not eventually, not conditionally, not after you have managed to become a better or more faithful or more composed version of yourself. Now, in this exact configuration of need and weariness and barely maintained hope. In the full and unedited reality of the life you are actually living, rather than the life you feel you ought to be living by now. The burden you carry has not gone unnoticed. It has been witnessed by something that does not forget, does not tire, does not look away when the carrying becomes ungraceful. And the weight of it is already, in ways you will begin to perceive with increasing clarity in the days that follow this encounter, beginning to be redistributed. Not removed entirely. You are still here, in your life, with its real and complex demands. But redistributed. Shared. Held not only by the part of you that has been holding everything alone, but by the presence that has been standing beside you since before the weight arrived and will remain beside you long after it has been set down. You are not carrying this alone. You never were. Go gently into what comes next, beloved. The hands beside yours have never let go.